All right, welcome to CDK Live. I'm Bruce Johnson, Vice President of Marketing at CDK. Joining me today is Peter Kahn, Head of Global Research at CDK. And today we're going to talk about some of the insights from our research around the dealership workplace. We all know that, first and foremost, the auto dealership business is a people business. And it's always a priority for dealers to be able to attract and retain key talent in the dealership. The people are what makes the business go. Churn is always something that when we talk to dealers, they're focused on managing. And in some roles, and for example, in sales, I know our research shows that turnover can be as high as 60%. So, Peter, we brought you a research request. Your team does some phenomenal research for us and publishing our insights, and we brought you a unique request and said, hey Peter, we want to better understand, for us at CDK, we want to better understand what it's like to work in the dealership, what attracts people to the dealership, why they stay, and probably most importantly, why they leave. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the research work that the team did for us on this?
You bet. I just want to talk a little bit about the history of the research we've done here. And I've always been really, really fascinated with the people side of this business. And in the interviews that we do with dealer principals, with general managers, and we ask them what do they feel they have control over, and what do they feel like that keeps them up at night. And one of the things that really is always a pain point for store leadership and department heads is managing their people. Not only is it a people business as far as building relationships with customers, but also you have a pretty big staff and they have to feel good every day about coming to work and doing their job. And so that led us to doing this research. And it's interesting because I don't know where exactly this hypothesis came from, but we started with this hypothesis that it must suck to work at a dealership. We went in with that idea. Okay.
And it was disproven, right?
It was disproven. Now, how did we disprove that? We first interviewed 20 folks that were working at a dealership, and we interviewed another 6 who had left the dealership, gone somewhere else. And that kind of gave us a framework on how we would go out and actually put a survey out there and find out from a lot larger audience. Mm-hmm. And that's what we did. We heard from over 300 folks working at a dealership, mostly in sales, mostly younger folks. But we also heard from store department heads and store leaders. And we actually also interviewed 100 folks that used to work at the dealership and find out, what did they think about that dealership experience? Yep. And what led them to leave. So great research, and super happy to share it with the folks here today.
So, top line, we talked about disproving it. Top line, what did we see in terms of overall satisfaction of the survey respondents?
Yeah, that's a great question. It turns out 3 out of 4 folks who responded to the survey said they were satisfied in the job. That's really great. So interestingly enough, the 3 big satisfiers in this order, the benefits were great. We'll talk a little bit more about the benefits. Compensation was also good. And to be quite frank, a lot of these folks are very coin operated. They're happy to make money, who isn't? And the third one, which was really interesting, was the ability to learn new skills, learn new skills, get into a fast-paced environment, again, working with other people, but also learning technology. So those were the big satisfiers. Interestingly enough, and a lot of the folks we heard are in sales, you'd expect they'd be kind of more team-oriented, but it turns out they're kind of lone wolves. We asked a question about working with others at the dealership, the team, and it turned out only 15% said that was a job satisfier. So it's benefits, it's money, and it's skills.
So when you talk about that, I think none of us would argue or be surprised that compensation is part of it. The nature of the people that gravitate to this business are highly motivated, and earning compensation is definitely a key thing. The benefits part of it, I know one of the other things you looked at is, differences in satisfaction level, depending on whether or not the dealership had an HR department.
Oh.
What did you find out on that, Peter?
Yeah, okay, so you're testing my memory here, Bruce, that's good. So just speaking about human resources, and I think we were somewhere around 50% or so had some HR resources available. That could be somebody at the store, it could be part of the group, central office, and we found a wide disparity between the Net Promoter Score, the level of satisfaction, which is what we use to gauge how satisfied these folks are in their job. By the way, for those folks that don't know, Net Promoter is, would you recommend this career, this job to others? And it turned out those folks who worked at a dealership that had access to HR resources, their NPS, by the way, it goes from plus 100 to minus 100, was about in the low 60s, which is a very, very good score.
Yes.
And if somebody did not work at a dealership that had an HR department, it sunk to 16. So a huge disparity as it related to was an HR person available or not. And that does go back, again, to some of those job satisfiers.
Right.
And you mentioned one of them, which was benefits.
Yes.
And I thought, why not? Let's go into that one.
Sure.
So looking at what are the big things that are satisfying to folks, benefits was number one. And when we
Healthcare, of course.
Yeah, when we peel that back, what benefits really matter?
What surprised you about that?
Yeah, most people would think, I want a good medical plan, right?
Yep.
Turned out, nope, they didn't. Not so important. What really mattered to them, and we'll talk a little about who we heard from, is 401k was the number one benefit.
Yeah.
And right behind that, by the way, was other employee plans that would help set a path for retirement. And part of the reason for that is, I certainly love my 401k. It's going to treat me well at some point. But part of the reasons for that was that we have a younger workforce that we heard from. And that's what the dealership workforce in general is. Mm-hmm. Most folks that we heard from were 30 or younger. So they're hard on making money, but also having a 401k. And they're maybe on their parents' plan when it comes to the medical and dental insurance, or maybe they're, what do they call it, the young invulnerables, where they don't feel like they need a medical. So that wasn't a big deal.
Yeah. So the younger folks on the research tended to over-index.
Give me more money. Give me a good 401k. Match my plan.
Yep.
That was it.
Gotcha. The other area that was very intriguing to our team was the skills development part of it, and the learning new skills, and it's something we really digested. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? What the research showed you there?
Yeah, you bet. So that was going back to those job satisfiers. That was the third highest rank, is learning new skills. I'm going to kind of take it at a different approach and talk about the folks that left the business. And again, we talked to 100 people that did. They were also, most of them were very positive about that experience that they had. And they found that working at a dealership actually gave them a lot of skills that they could carry forward in their new careers. Certainly working with other people, implicit selling, which is something that we all have to do in our jobs, unless you live in a closet. And then just understanding how to work with technology. And so, again, the folks that left, their net promoter was a little bit lower than the folks that were currently working at a dealership, but still very strong. And that recollection of skill building, career building, a lot of folks that are currently working at dealerships, honestly, it's their first job, their first job out of high school or college. So it got them started really well.
Yeah, and that's something that really, I think, really resonated with us at CDK here, where we have a very heavy focus on learning and skills building with our CDK University training courses and our newly introduced certifications, and really feel like that those things will be an asset to dealers to help their staffs, especially that younger staff, with that skills building side of it. So that was an exciting thing for us to see, and I think something that we really took to heart. So you kind of started to pivot a little bit in, Peter, into why people leave and the dissatisfiers.
Yep.
I know that there was something that kind of jumped out at the top as the main reason that people leave. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. And this should not be a surprise to anybody who's worked at a dealership. It's the long hours. And the attendant job stress that goes with it. So people, again, they like the job, they like the money, but if they're working 14 hours a day on a Saturday, they're not seeing their kids, Some customers are not very friendly to them. Maybe they have a little bit of a boss who's really pushing them too hard, and so that leads to job stress, employee burnout. We actually were up here a little while ago talking about friction points, and so dealing with technologies that don't work together well. They don't have integration, so you have to repeat tasks.
Yep.
Just takes the job longer. You've got a customer waiting, and all that, again, can build on stress. So those were the big reasons why people were either considering leaving, and there's this idea of quiet quitting, and we got some of those. So either considering leaving either that dealership, going to another dealership, or just leaving the business altogether.
Yeah. I know, you talk about the long hours and also the stress side of it.
Yep.
We were having a conversation with a dealer here yesterday about, the topic came up about dealing with difficult customers, and in particular what we were discussing was price negotiations and differences of opinion. And one of the things that he really highlighted is he said, in his experience, the more data that his staff has, the better equipped they feel in terms of dealing with those difficult conversations and difficult customers. So, this really, validates, with that being the number one reason, that, the long hours and the stress associated with it, being kind of the, top driver as to why people choose to leave the dealership business. It makes me feel good that we're focused on tools that, create efficiency in the dealership, that hopefully can help them cut down on the long hours, and then also tools that equip them with information and hopefully can put them in a spot to not have as stressful conversations with customers.
So thank you, Bruce. I'm going to go into another place.
Okay.
And talk about sales a bit, because we do a lot of research at CDK. It starts with the customer, and it certainly then comes around and we get a perspective from a dealer point of view. And especially with Gen Z, and I'm talking about shoppers now, it's their first time to visiting the dealership. And honestly, they're a little bit frightened, they're a little bit nervous, they've not gone through this process before. And what we found is if the salesperson is respectful of that person's time, demonstrates expertise, answers the questions, demonstrates product knowledge, then that builds trust. And trust really matters. And to your point, having that information to bring that transparency forward and answer all the shopper's questions, once you establish that trust, we then found that led to the customer believing they got a fair price from the dealership, and we're on our way to a deal. So yes, absolutely, having good systems that work together, that provide information to make the dealer's job easier and build that trust and transparency, you're going to see more closes, you're going to see people are going to have an easier job, they're going to get better compensation. So it all plays together.
So you mentioned Gen Z here, and I know one of the things in this research, you did some demographic slicing and dicing, and one of the things that really stood out to me is women in the dealership. That while our other research, tells us that women are involved in either, the actual purchase or influencing the purchase, with 80% of the vehicle purchases, in the dealership workforce, they only make up about 30%. What did you find, in terms of, that, or what insights came out of it in terms of what's important for dealers in terms of that balance there?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. And in the previous, I would call human resource type research we've done in the past, we've done a lot. We were mostly focused on women in the workforce. And not only in our sample, 30% were women, but when we found in actually doing the demographics, the number is smaller, and particularly when we talk about the front end side of the business, sales folks. I think it was somewhere less than double digits, 7%, 8% of women were actually selling cars. And at the same time, over 60% of folks who, actually it's 80%, are women either directly buying the car or a strong influence on the purchase. People buy from people that they trust, people that they can relate to. And so having such a small ratio of women on the front line and having so many customers, female customers, that's a disparity. So how do we fix that? And that goes back to your question about how do women feel about their job versus men?
Right.
And it turns out their satisfaction, the drivers are still the same. Benefits, compensation, skills, those are still the same. And when we heard from women working at dealerships, they found it was a great way to start a career, and it was a good opportunity for women to make good money. But their NPS was about 10 points lower, and work-life balance really had an impact for them. Also, interestingly enough, and this didn't come out so much on the male side, but having a strong mentor really mattered. Having leaders that listened really mattered. And so when we think about the needs of our workforce, both men and women, and when we think about, again, specifically women, if we want more women in the workforce, we have to take those into consideration. We have to drive the NPS up. We have to think about work-life balance. We have to make sure that they're mentored well and that they have leaders that listen to them and support them. And then I think we're going to be okay.
Yep. And maybe coming back, to Gen Z.
Yep.
I think there were a few things that you highlighted earlier about popped out with Gen Z. But what was the top thing that showed up there is Gen Z is becoming such an important part of the dealership workforce.
Yep.
What was kind of the top line that came out of you there come out of the research there for you on Gen Z?
They're less satisfied.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it any other way. I mean,
but was it around looking for growth, personal growth, skills growth? Was that one of the big dissatisfiers?
It's interesting, Bruce. The mid-range compensation that people were earning was between $50,000 to $75,000.
Okay.
And again, what we got from Gen Z was compensation mattered more than benefits, slightly more.
Mm-hmm.
And if we believe they're making between $50,000 to $75,000, first job out of high school or college or whatever, seems like pretty good money to me. I don't know how you did when you were young, but
the big job dissatisfier was the long hours.
The long hours and expecting actually to make more money than they were making. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, first of all, for the research that you brought to bear for us. Definitely valuable for us at CDK and with our dealers. We share this research with our dealers and always want to know more about what's going on in the dealership. It helps us be the best possible partner we can. I think some of the key takeaways that we pulled out of this is, first, you talked about bringing more women into the dealership workforce. Dealers have to prioritize it. Just as simple as that. HR departments matter. You got to take into account what audiences benefits are important to and understand which benefits it is. And while compensation is important, it's not the only thing that drives people. Work-life balance is super important, especially in those two demographics we talked about, which is Gen Z and women.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with all those points. Yeah, it's and back to your point about churn at the very start of this conversation. If we want to keep more people at the dealership, our dealership, we need to make sure they're paid fairly, and that we give them that good work-life balance so they're not over-stressed out. And it does go back to your point about having good systems in place that makes their job easier, that they're able to spend more time with their customers, engaging with the customers, building that trust and transparency, and then driving more sales. That's really the net of it.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you, sir.
It's a pleasure. And this will conclude this session of CDK Live.